This is something that I really struggle with. I mean, I use it just about every day, and it's a lot of fun, and it's incredible. And sometimes it's wrong. Most of the time it's right. But a question that I get a lot that I am unable to answer is, how would a CIA officer operating in 2026 evade AI to cross borders, to carry out an intelligence operation, to essentially fly under the radar? Is it even possible in the age of AI to do something and not be detected, like crossing a border?
Yeah, it depends on what country you're trying to penetrate, I would think. I would think that this is one of the reasons why we don't really have a great human intelligence set in China. You can't break into China anymore. I mean, not really.
No.
It's very difficult. Certain countries, yes, you could still use those conventional forms of spycraft, I would think, but metadata collection and the grid, if you will, not to sound all Tron here, but the grid is it's pretty ubiquitous these days. And interestingly, it's actually not China that's building it out to the level that you would think. It's actually the United States. It's actually the Europeans who are really committed to this kind of big brother. I mean, of course, China has a social credit system within their country, but we're talking about spreading our surveillance state globally. And obviously, there's reasons, for the intelligence community that wants to do that. But I'm not sure it's good for anybody, any average citizen anywhere, to have the U.S. I'm probably going to get in trouble for saying this, but to have the U.S. intelligence, apparatus all-seeing Gorgon stare, wherever in the world. In terms of penetration, I would think that many traditional forms of spycraft are going to go by the wayside. We're going to have to create entirely new methods because it will be increasingly difficult. But then again, I think about the border, and I'm like, look at all the millions of people that slipped in. I mean, maybe actually it still will be easy, but I can't imagine it would be.
Yeah,
that's not really a good answer. I apologize.
No, I have to agree with you. This is still a no man's land. We don't know the answers to these questions because the questions haven't been around long enough for us to formulate answers.
The only limiting factor would be energy. What energy is available, what water is available to sustain the data centers that really power AI. And if these companies start really getting into nuclear power, yes, it would benefit average energy consumers by offering alternatives, but that would ensure that the surveillance state would be truly all-seeing and basically uninterruptible.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you about economic strength. You've argued that economic strength underpins military power. What domestic policies do you think are the most important for sustaining long-term American competitiveness?
Well, this is very interesting because I occasionally consult with the Department of the Air Force, and I remember I was at the Capitol Hill Club giving a briefing to about a dozen of these generals, and one of the generals came up to me, and he was very disturbed because I talked about the tech sector in China and sort of what's going on there with STEM education and whatnot. And, he said that he was assigned to Google, which I thought was interesting. I said, okay. And he said, there's all these kids at Google are brilliant, but they all hate America. And I laughed and I said, part of the problem is the educational system in the United States. I go, not only are we churning out kids that are statistically dumber than their predecessors in previous generations, I said, but we're also turning out kids who have been indoctrinated on some level to not like the country that they're living in. And I said, I would say that the greatest strategic threat to the United States is our educational program or lack thereof. It's not China or Russia. It's our ability to cultivate and propagate human capital. China has a very impressive human capital base. Russia, actually, I know people make fun of the Russians. They have this sort of 1990s view of Russia. But the Russians have always had a very, very healthy human capital base, at least among the top level of their people, very educated scientists, innovators and whatnot. And so I would say that one of the ways that we sustain our competitiveness long term is we're going to have to figure out how to teach our kids reading, writing, and math. Yes. Again, we've got to go back to the basics, and what we're doing is not working. And when I left government, I did a few years as a teacher. I didn't know what I wanted to do with myself, and I was a high school teacher, social studies, and I saw firsthand. I always tell people I was on the front lines of that battle, and I quit for a reason. It was mortifying, and I was at a relatively good school. Our kids are not being taught well. The system does not encourage teachers to teach well. It doesn't hire the best always teacher. You have to really have a passion for it. You go to some of these Asian countries and teachers there are making like $200,000 a year, the equivalent of that. Come to the United States, they're not making that. So you're not attracting the talent, and you're not prioritizing the young people in the United States. You're prioritizing the gerontocracy. We're paying out more to old people every year than we do to our young people, and then we wonder why the country's burning all around us.
How bad do you think that gets? This declining public trust, declining trust in our institutions. How bad of an impact is this going to be on national cohesion?
Oh, I think it's critical in crisis levels. I mean, I think that it will be a miracle if we can avoid some kind of civil, I don't want to say civil war, but some kind of civil disruption. We are, I think, rapidly heading toward that, regardless of what happens. And by the way, if this thing in the Middle East really gets bad with the disruptions, that could expedite the breakdown, right? Because people are going to be fighting for resources at home.
Yeah.
It's going to get ugly fast. And I think at this point, the only thing we can do is push through it. I don't think we can avoid it. It might not be as bad, but I think that we are really heading toward there's a reason that Xi Jinping right now is very confident around President Trump.
Yeah.
I think it's because he has assessed, and I think Putin has assessed this, although I don't think Putin is as excited of this as is Xi, that the Americans are definitely in decline, and we're going to be going through some really nasty stuff over the next decade that probably will break the country down for a period of time at least. On that happy note.
I know, right? I hate to agree.
Dr. Doom again, strikes again.
But I have to agree. Listen, all my life I've been accused of being overly optimistic about things, about life in general. And I'm trying really hard to be optimistic about this, but I have to agree with you. I think we are headed towards some sort of civil
crisis.
Unrest. Civil crisis is the best way to say it. Some sort of civil crisis. I don't know exactly what it'll be about, but I'll add that I was in Ireland recently, a few weeks ago, and
they're not doing well.
And they experienced the biggest demonstrations in the history of Ireland over gas prices. We complain here, like, I actually refused to get gas day before yesterday because I refused to pay $4.59 a gallon. I won't do it on principle.
Like $5-something here,
and it's $9 plus a gallon in Ireland, and the Irish make about 2/3 of what the average American makes. You just can't do it.
No. Well, then they also have. They also have these issues with the demographics, right? I mean, they've had immigration issues. It's funny because I'm good friends with an author named Michael Walsh, and he lives in Ireland and hates the British, but he's now openly advocating. Yeah, he's openly advocating that let bygones be bygones. Native-born Irishmen need to befriend native-born British and form an alliance that basically stops the unwanted flow of refugees and migration into to Ireland and Britain, because it is having deleterious impacts on the stability and the social cohesion of those countries. And so basically it has to be a stand of the Anglosphere against their own governments. I mean, this is the part that people don't seem to really understand is it's our own governments who are making really bad policy decisions, and I'm still trying to figure out if it's intentional or if it's just incompetence or bad ideology, maybe some combination thereof. But, we entered the 21st century, the Anglosphere, the American English-speaking countries, entered as undisputed champions of, the Cold War, the World Wars. I mean, we came out of the 20th century looking like, we were Supermen. And then in 26 years, it's all gone away. And it's now people are seriously thinking about China is the new future. And actually, if you look at the amount of world leaders that Xi in the last 6 to 8 weeks has entertained in Beijing, including many of our allies, they're looking to Beijing as a stabilizing force, not to Washington. This is a very, very, very irreparable, I think, situation for the West. And now we just got to try to, save what we can, to last a little longer. But I don't think the idea of dominance, I think that needs to get out of people's heads, because we can't dominate anything. We can't even dominate our own border,
Right.
So, yeah.
Well, let me ask you about that.
I don't know if that answered your question either. I'm sorry.
It does. You and I are of like mind on this. The United States, it's no secret that the United States has a military budget that exceeds that of the next 9 largest countries combined.
Yeah.
It's bankrupting us. And in the meantime, we have terrible roads and terrible airports and terrible bridges that are falling into the rivers below them, terrible ports, ships crashing into those bridges that we saw in
Never to be
Baltimore.
rebuilt.
Never to be rebuilt.
Yeah.
Is it even possible to transition from this gigantic military budget to a budget focused on physical plant and infrastructure and transportation, or are we past the point of no return?
I think it's going, and I've been accused lately by people who used to be friends of mine in D.C. of rooting for the enemy. So I'm not. So I'm trying to figure out how to phrase this without being seen as. But basically, I think it's probably going to require a strategic defeat of the United States military for Congress to wake up and for our leaders to wake up and say how we've been doing it since 1991 is not working.
It's not working.
And I wish that there was another way. I have for 10 years been trying to get the government to change its evil ways in the defense sector. That, it goes in one ear and out the other. Everybody smiles and nods, and then they go about their day collecting their paycheck. So until the system is shocked, and I think it would require something like a strategic defeat. It would have to be a big enough one, though, because we had a strategic defeat in Afghanistan and nobody batted an eye. We just went into Ukraine.
True.
We're having a strategic defeat in Ukraine. Really, we are.
Yes.
And nobody cares. We're getting our asses kicked in the Middle East, and nobody seems to care.
Yes.
So I don't know what it's going to... That's the only thing that I can think of is a strategic defeat on some level, or the loss of an aircraft carrier in combat, which I think we came very close to a handful of times in the last year. But something significant to shock people and to say, hey, we can't do this anymore. And by the way, we're going to be spending $1.5 trillion. What is it actually getting us? I mean, we're losing everywhere we go. So I don't want to say my hope, but something like that shocking, because having a politician campaign on this is not enough. It's because they don't change anything once they get into power. I mean, this with the intelligence community, right? I mean, there's a lot of reforms the IC needs, but they keep being given all the money. They keep being given all the,
virtually an unlimited budget. Yes.
Virtually an unlimited budget. I mean, John Brennan is not at CIA, but a lot of his people still are. And
yes, they are.
It's like, so, I mean, unless there's like a real gutting of the defense and intelligence apparatus with personnel and with projects, we're never going to make that change. One of the things I do get heartened by, though, is we have to make the argument that industrial policy, education policy, even trade policy, these are national security policies as well. So maybe there's a way we could convince people to focus on those domestic kind of policies by making it about it's a security thing, too.
And
ultimately, though, it is. But ultimately, though, as long as the Defense Department is sucking up that much money, we're going to be stuck in this rut. And I think actually another answer, and I don't know if you would agree with this or not, but I think federalism, subsidiarity, where we let the states have more control over their futures, I think that actually might ameliorate some of the breakdown, the violent breakdown that I fear is coming. If you let the localities and the states have more control, California does its thing, Florida does its thing, that might... It'll cause problems, but that is the Constitution at its core. Was what it was supposed to be about, is the regions and the states and the local cities, they all kind of have some degree of autonomy because we're such a big country. You let them experiment. That to me might be one way also out of the civil crisis that I fear is coming.
Yeah. You and I are in complete agreement over these strategic mistakes that have been made. I was at the CIA in those days where we were talking about the peace dividend. And it was all over. We won. We're the unipower in the world. And then things just kind of went down the toilet after 9/11.
It would have worked. Actually, I argue 9/11 was the spark, but actually you could see the breakdown by 1993.
Yeah.
You could see the breakdown by Black Hawk Down. You could see the breakdown in logic.
Good point.
going back to Serbia and Kosovo, right? Because the theory in international relations, not to get too theoretical here, but I am a nerd, the theory was R2P, responsibility to protect. Well, the Cold War was over, and the failing of the Cold War was we had too many cold-hearted realists. Now that there's no Soviet enemy, we're the unipolar power. We can dictate human rights and democracy and morality.
Yes.
And that is actually what triggered, I think, a lot of our problems. It set us up for 9/11 brilliantly in a way, because a lot of the Muslim world was looking at us going, we don't want transgender rights or whatever, we don't want whatever you're selling, and so this, I think, on some level helped to create the fertile ground for the revolutionary Islamic side of things.
I think that's right.
Been downhill since then.
You see, you've anticipated my next question. My next question was, what strategic mistakes do you think the United States made after the Cold War that sort of led to the current position? But that's it right there. And I have to
Imperial.
agree.
Yeah,
yeah.
It's the empire. Yeah,
it is.
Yeah, there are certain things that we can have dominance in. Like I've always said, we should be the top dog in like space. That's something that we need. We use space more than any other country, so by definition, I think we should have a greater role up there. But in terms of, do I care about running Nigeria or Timbuktu, or you pick some small, like, why are we obsessing over that? Why do I care as an American? Actually, why should I care what happens in the internal dynamics of Iran? Why should I care about the river in Lebanon that they're fighting over right now, the Litani River? Why should I, as an American living in Florida, why do I care about the Litani River rights? Like, this should not even be on my radar. But this is, so there are things that we don't need to worry about, that we're being made to worry about, that's creating this feedback loop that feeds the deep state, feeds the war machine, and justifies imperial overstretch. Of course, they don't see it as imperial overstretch, but that's what it is. It's breaking our force structure. We can't address real strategic concerns now, like China.
Oh my gosh, yes. I have to ask you about NATO. The president of Cyprus made a statement 2 or 3 weeks ago in which he said that the European Union is compelled to come up with a NATO-like defense structure because NATO can't be relied on. And listen, I travel a lot, just like you travel a lot, and I've been getting the same hypothetical question lately that is fascinating to me, and it doesn't really have an answer. The Israeli defense minister has said publicly that Israel's next big fight is going to be with Turkey. And the Turks say, bring it on, right? It's one of the biggest militaries in NATO. They hate the Israelis. They're ready for a fight. Okay, well, this is not so simple. If the Israelis do attack Turkey, a very big if, and Turkey invokes Article 5 of the the NATO Charter, the United States and every other NATO country would be compelled to fight Israel on behalf of Turkey. The Greeks are just delighting in this, as are the Cypriots.
I bet they are.
But it's a real question.
It is. I've gotten it myself.
To me, it would be the end of NATO, because there's no possible way the United States ever would defend Turkey against Israel. Diplomatically, sure, they send a Philip Habib type person to do shuttle diplomacy and, they try to get everybody to back down. But how do you see something like that playing out?
Well, I actually think, just remove the Americans from the equation for a second, I actually don't think Europe would defend Turkey. I mean,
don't either.
There was a chance in 2002, and this is a great missed opportunity, I think, on the part of the Europeans. There was a chance. Turkey wanted to be fully integrated into the EU, and they're already in NATO, but they wanted to be fully integrated into the European society. It's very similar to what happened with Russia in the 90s and 2000s.
Sure.
They wanted to be part of that European system, and the Europeans went, we'll get around to it. And we all know the reason that the Europeans didn't want them in there. It was cultural. It was historical. Okay. Well,
and they already occupy another European Union country.
That's true. Yes. So the Europeans are sitting there going, we don't. And then of course there's the issue with the Greeks as well. So ultimately the Europeans said, no thanks, but keep sending your people up to be used as laborers and whatnot. But ultimately, that set Turkey down this course of I don't want to say Islamic extremism, but they decidedly turned away from the Western bearing that they were on under Ataturk, and then embraced Erdogan's vision of a more unique society in Southern Europe that was different and yet equal, if not superior militarily, to Europe. I don't believe NATO would ever defend Turkey, and to be fair, I don't think Israel will actually attack Turkey.
Nor do I.
People don't understand behind the scenes, despite their rhetoric, Erdogan and Netanyahu are business partners in many respects with these pipelines. There's a lot of evidence suggesting that with the help of the U.S. at times, Israel, Turkey, the U.S., some of the Arab states were supporting these jihadi groups, for instance, in Syria, which was part of a wider scheme to create these new pipelines, natural gas and oil pipelines that would benefit Turkey, benefit Israel, benefit certain Arab states. And that's a whole nother story. In fact, right now, though, you are seeing Turkey and Israel and the U.S. cooperating on creating the Zangezur corridor in Central Asia with Azerbaijan, where we are basically letting everybody slaughter the Christians so that we can build this pipeline that will take Central Asian energy through northern Iraq into Syria, now controlled by head-chopping Jelani, and then pump it up into parts of Israel and into Turkey, where Turkey will then disseminate it to Europe, and they can charge transit fees and whatnot. So, I don't actually believe the rivalry between Turkey and Israel is actually true. I think that's a lot for show. And I think that if Israel did really want to take on Turkey, I think Turkey is enough of a military power on its own that would be a very ill-advised move by Israel. I mean, Israel can't defeat Hezbollah right now. The Merkava massacres are going on right now. Right. So this is, ultimately, though, the question of NATO in general, I think the United States should have bailed out of NATO at the end of the Cold War and should have relied on the OSCE as a framework for security that would have allowed Russia to take part in it, and it would have stabilized, and it would have created basically a security cordon involving Russia that would have gone from basically Los Angeles through Europe all the way to Vladivostok.
Thank you very much for being with us today. That was Brandon Weichert. And thank you for watching. This is The Deep State. And remember to always ask the questions the government doesn't want you asking. I'm John Kiriakou. We'll see you next time. So I've said on previous podcasts and in interviews that I travel frequently on the Pennsylvania Turnpike. I grew up in Western Pennsylvania. It's coal country. And you get on the Pennsylvania Turnpike and you see these enormous billboards. And they say, winds die, the sun sets, but coal is forever. Just yesterday, Secretary of, Interior, Doug Borgham, the former governor of North Dakota, was testifying on Capitol Hill, and he said that essentially the same thing, that the sun sets and winds die. Like he's maybe never heard of the concept of the battery. What does all this mean in terms of energy policy?
I'm sorry, I heard that. I heard that, and I thought of an episode of Veep. I thought I was watching an episode of Veep. I just, but please, I didn't mean to cut you off. Please continue.
Not at all. I mean, Americans can't be that thick that they just decide, well, these alternative energy sources, we're just going to let them go, and we're going to rely on coal and oil. I mean, that's. Right. And let me add one other thing. I happened to be in Dubai 2 months ago. And I was invited by a royal family member out into the desert on his farm. And off in the distance, you could see this monolith. It just looked like a monolith, like out of 2001: A Space Odyssey, right? Yeah. It's just this monolith sticking out of the sand in the desert. And the sun was reflecting on it to the point where it was blinding. You had to kind of shield your eyes. Mm-hmm. And I said, what is that thing out there? And he said, can you guess what it is? And I said, no, it looks like a monolith, like out of a science fiction movie. He said, it is a monolith. It's covered in mirrors. Yeah. And it reflects the sunlight onto solar panels because we're converting to solar energy.
Yeah.
Well, why aren't we converting to solar energy or wind energy? Denmark is already self-sufficient because of wind. The Greeks are almost self-sufficient because of wind.
Yeah.
What about us?
Well, I think it's not the American people have decided that alternatives are not worthwhile. I think it's the ruling oligarchs who have decided that it's not worth their time.
Yeah.
And why wouldn't they say that? Because they're all invested in oil and natural gas and, these other things. Interestingly, it isn't just wind and solar I think we should be developing. This country is bountiful. We should be investing heavily. We haven't built a new nuclear power reactor in 40 years. China right now is leading the world. They have the hottest tokamak burning nuclear fusion reactor. Now, this is different from nuclear power as we understand it. That's fission. Fusion is a much more, if they can make it work, it's a much better method of nuclear power. And China's leading the world in the R&D in that. We're still far behind that. China's also, I just talked to a CEO yesterday of a small modular nuclear reactor company, and he said that China is eating our lunch in small nuclear modular reactors. There's hydropower. Of course, China has the Three Gorges Dam, the largest dam in the world. There's geothermal power. China's developing that too. And then also, when we talk solar power, not just traditional solar power, the United States in 1968, Jim Rice, who's the former NASA Opportunity Rover director, was a friend of mine, and he pioneered a lot of the research in NASA for space-based solar power. And as he said to me, over the last 10 years, the only ones showing up to his conferences on space-based solar power are Chinese scientists, because they recognize the strategic implications of putting solar energy collectors in geosynchronous orbit and then permanently beaming microwave energy down to collectors on the ground. And this is a strategic concern as well. The NSA in 2007 posited they wanted to do this, and the George W. Bush administration said, no, thanks, we're not going to do that. So my point here is it's not just solar and wind, but in terms of why we're not leading there, part of it is because of these oligarchs in the United States, and that's what they are. And then the other part, though, is that we have allowed for China to edge, for instance, with solar panels. China ate our lunch with solar panels.
Yes, that's
so
true.
now it's no longer profitable for American firms. Remember Solyndra during the Obama administration and that controversy. So it's no longer competitive or smart for businesses in the United States, which have to show return on investment. Unlike in China, where they're state-backed and they can sit in the red in more than one way for many years before turning a profit. But the point here is there have been a certain set of events, decisions made by policymakers, both to appeal to our oligarchs, but also because China has so fundamentally disrupted these alternative energy spaces. It's no longer economically of interest for these firms to invest in these alternative energy sources.
You have written extensively about great power competition. How do you see the coming decade or couple of decades in terms of this constant competition between the United States on one side and Russia and China on the other vis-a-vis energy?
Well, I think that the United States and Russia both have a lot of comparative advantages in terms of traditional forms of power, like fossil, and I don't like that term, fossil fuels, but oil, natural gas. Both we and Russia have that in abundance. China, they have to import, as you know from your time in the Middle East, the Chinese have to import a lot of their traditional energy from the region,
yes,
which is one of the reasons why the Strait of Hormuz closure has been a headache for China, although the idea that China is going to collapse because of this disruption is absurd. They have had plenty of time, and they have taken that time to build up their reserves. But China has a lot of advantages, as we just spoke about, in the alternative energy domain. And while people may poo-poo the alternative energy in America as, it has to blow right to make the wind energy work, they have to have the sun out. The fact of the matter is, just forget about solar and wind for a second. Like I said, nuclear, geothermal, and hydropower are more than enough.
How about tidal power?
Right.
That's another
right.
one.
That's right. And so the Chinese, so the three powers, and it really is, we're living in my opinion, a tripolar system that it's unstable, as all tripolar systems are, and it's transitioning toward a truly multipolar domain or world. on certain ways, the United States, because of the abundance we have under our feet, if we could tap into it the way we should, we could be very competitive. But right now, we are not. And I argue that the system here in the United States precludes us from maximizing even our advantages with traditional energy forms like natural gas and oil. I would also remind everybody, shale is usually much easier or much quicker to respond to market changes than oil is. But even with the time now that the shale producers of America have had to see, hey, there's a disruption that's not going to go away from the Strait of Hormuz thing. The fact of the matter is, not even the shale companies are really pivoting the way they should be to develop. So you have a lot of bullishness in the market, but not a lot of people buying it and not a lot of people investing long term, which indicates to me that we are actually, because of that, poorly positioned for this new domain of energy great state competition. Whereas China, even though it doesn't have the same oil and natural gas that we in Russia do, they have a diversified portfolio. They have scalability. We don't. And then Russia, with its traditional oil and natural gas, they've got the Yamal Peninsula. They've got the Power of Siberia lines. In fact, my understanding is they are going to be settling. They're in the process of settling the dispute with China to get the Power of Siberia 2 pipeline going to connect those Siberian natural gas flows directly into China. That could take about 18 to 36 months to complete, which is really quick if you think about it, given the scale of that project. The point is, we are not well positioned right now.
Donald Trump is in China right now, meeting with Xi Jinping right now, literally as we speak. And he took a whole plane load of tech CEOs with him, including Elon Musk and some of the other biggest names in American business. Are they also going to be talking about energy? And if so, what are the most strategic challenges, do you think, that the Chinese pose over the next decade?
Well, the interesting thing here is everybody Trump brought with him, including his family members, are can't forget that they are the family's coming along.
On the plane.
They're all on the plane, kind of like Hunter used to be. So the biggest thing here that's interesting is everybody who he brought with him to China are all engagers. These are not hawks on China for the most part. I mean, you can say Elon goes back and forth, but ultimately Elon is, Tesla's going gangbusters right now in China, so he doesn't want to disrupt that at all. So everybody he brought with were either banksters or broligarchs from the tech sector. So they all want greater ties to China, and for the most part, I'm speaking generally because Elon is pro-American industry. SpaceX is entirely American produced. But for the most part, everybody on that plane is a globalist. Everybody on that plane doesn't want really reindustrialization of the United States. They prefer just to cut deals and have everything overseas. So I think what you're gearing up for is, I think Trump has recognized he screwed the pooch economically with this ridiculous Iran war, and now he's trying to flail going into the midterms by saying, let's get $1 trillion investment over the next 10 years from China. That should boost the economy and keep me going long enough to help the GOP stay in power on some level. What does this mean, or what kind of threats does China pose to the United States? I would say that right now we are in the process of finalizing the fire sale of America to China that was begun in the 1970s. Because there is no reversing this trend now if Trump does get this quote-unquote deal. It's important to note, he's not going to negotiate from a position of strength. He's negotiating from a position of weakness. And Xi Jinping will be very gracious, as we saw yesterday. He'll be very gracious to his face. But at the end of the day, reality is China has the cards now, and they're going to play them deftly. It will boost, I think, increased trade would boost certain key sectors of the United States in the near term. But the long term is we are ceding the strategic future of the United States as the dominant power globally, most likely to China.
I cannot have you on the show without asking about rare earth metals. I've followed this like you have for many, many years. The United States has some rare earth metals, but they're very difficult to raise, and there's a lot of money that's lost while you're digging for rare earth metals. The Chinese are happy to absorb that loss. And we buy just about everything we need. And we need rare earth metals for everything from, car bumpers to cell phones to Tomahawk missiles. We buy almost all of it from China. We buy a little bit from the Democratic Republic of the Congo. But But what happens next? And what happens if the Chinese just decide, no, we're not going to sell anymore to you?
Well, that's their trump card, and they've already said they've imposed, just like we used to do, right? They've imposed export controls on dual-use rare earth minerals. It's important to remember, China spent about 10 to 15 years dutifully buying up as much or gaining control over as much of the known quantities of rare earth production facilities, mining facilities, processing facilities as they could, with this end goal in mind, being able to squeeze the United States and its allies, because those rare earth minerals, as you note, are essential for all technology. Basically, any technology designed after the 1970s, you got to have rare earths for. They're called rare earths not because they're not a lot of them. It's because you have to go very deep to get them, and then you have to process them. I think the level of processing is insane. That acid baths and whatnot.
Yes, it's mostly
China.
Waste.
It's mostly waste, and it's very, very devastating to the environment. China, the real strength they have, though, is they own all the processing facilities. And it's important to understand also, we in the United States have, yes, there's rare earth minerals throughout the Americas. And in North America, we could be, and we are not because of environmental issues, we are not mining for rare earths. But most of the rare earths, my understanding, in the Americas are or at least in North America, are considered light rare earths. What we need are the heavier rare earths, and that's what China really has a capital on. And even if we could get those light rare earths out of the ground, we don't have the processing facilities here in the United States. We'd have to send them to China for processing. Ironically, we in the 1980s, the United States in a plant in Kokomo, Indiana, created the process of rare earth mineral processing, and ultimately, because of deindustrialization, sold it to China. We dismantled it and sent it over there. So now for 30 or 40 years now, we've had to rely on China for rare earth mineral processing, and that's going to be their trump card in any negotiation. Already is, John. And, they're not going to give that up lightly. They're going to extract considerable concessions from the president, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right. I also wanted to ask you about industrial capacity. You frequently talk about this, the importance of industrial capacity and technological innovation. Has the U.S. gone too far in terms of deindustrialization? Are we too dependent now on foreign supply chains?
Yeah, 100%. And, I thought that COVID would have been the wake-up call because of all the supply chain disruptions. But yet again, the banksters, they were not going to let us live long enough to learn that hard lesson, because as soon as COVID ended, they went right back basically to business as usual. They diversified a little bit, encouraging some companies to leave China and go to Vietnam or Indonesia. But ultimately, they're not coming back home. And this is the problem, because we really need to reindustrialize here. Now, something that I have been talking about, and this is a relatively new thing for me, because I was always considered a hawk on China, but now I believe we've passed the point of no return with China. I think that there is no containing them anymore, and to do that is a waste of resources at this point, given how integrated and dominant they've become in the global system. I think actually, and I was talking about this with Dan Collins and also another author colleague of mine, Brendan O'Reilly, these are two Mandarin speakers, and so these guys understand China on a level that most DC people do not. The theory now is what if we could entice Chinese firms to come to the United States to actually kind of do what they did to us, which was basically we would go over to China, we would bring our factory, we would bring our advanced processes, but to gain access to the market share of China in the 90s and the 80s, they would make our firms hire Chinese workers. We'd have to teach the Chinese workers everything we knew, expose them to our industrial practices, and then they were able to create indigenously over time the rivals to the American firm. And something that we're talking about is why not get China to do that for us, right? Where we entice, because we know Xi wants to invest here. So we get China to bring in some of their industry, because they have leapfrogged us in industry in many respects. Get them to teach us their processes, show us their technologies, and then we do the same thing to them over time that they did to us in the last century.
That makes perfect sense. The Chinese are enormous investors in treasury bills, government bonds. Our economies are intertwined. The only thing that makes sense is cooperation. And that actually,
point, yes.
And that actually leads to my next question too. In terms of defense planning or warfare, the future of warfare. What lessons do you think our own policymakers should take from recent conflicts regarding the future of warfare and defense policy? What I mean is, we've seen that drone warfare, for example, appears to be the future of warfighting. Not these giant lumbering, aircraft carriers that we're all so proud of that take an entire day to turn around.
Yeah.
It's robots and these robot dogs right out of Black Mirror and drones. How do we adapt to that?
Well, the first thing we need to do is stop, and this is the same problem pretty much with every U.S. government policy, from the Defense Department and all the way to the Department of Education. We conflate spending more tax dollars with giving more capabilities that are more relevant to the problem set, and that's not the case. China and Russia spend a fraction on their militaries that we do, and they, in some respects, have more competent forces that are strategically tailored to their reality. So dominating the Indo-Pacific, at least in that first island chain for China, and really dominating Central Asia and Eastern Europe from the Russian perspective. The Russians and Chinese have mastered this, and one of the things they've done is to recognize that cheap drone swarms, cheap swarms of mass-producible missiles, hypersonic weapons. You don't even need to put nuclear warheads on them. Hypersonic